also HMDA data. And those three components are all very much so intertwined with each other because they all require certain data to be complete. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is things that are really for regulatory requirements. I am going to ask if anyone could just mute their line or mute themselves so we can reduce the background noise. Thanks so much. Can you still hear me? I think so. So again, what we're talking about are those three components: adverse, ATR, and HMDA. So the first thing I'm going to start with is the changes to the adverse request process. So you may have already noticed that we have made some changes to the forms that are available to you in your production environment. And that's because we have sunset one of your previous adverse forms, and we have given you a new adverse form. So previously you had an adverse form called adverse with macros, and depending on your persona, you either could see it or you couldn't see it. So now the adverse process is very much so put into your hands as the end users to request that the beginning stages of an adverse loan. So one of the challenges that your compliance teams and your leadership have experienced is when HMDA regulations changed in 2018. There was a significant increase in the number of data fields that were required. And these data fields have to be populated on all transactions, whether it actually ever made it to consummation or not. So whether that loan closed or not, there are certain data fields that have to be populated. And part of the challenge that your compliance teams have been faced with is making sure they have all of that data, even on a loan application that adverses. And so the goal of this form is to really, it helps to control that data integrity and make sure that your compliance team has all the data they need in order to truly adverse that transaction and have it be prepared for all of the regulatory reporting that's required within our industry. So you might be asking yourselves, okay, fine, well, this is a really crazy busy form, and what am I going to have to do? So from your side of it, from the end user side, it's pretty straightforward what you have to do. A lot of this data is on the screen for you just as advisory is really what it is. It's there as a way for you to know, okay, this information's here. I shouldn't be being stopped for this data. So one of the things I said at the beginning of the call was that the data is required when loans reach an application status. And so there's going to be certain data that you have to have entered in that file. And as you can see, I just opened up a random test loan to show you guys this. But some of the data that we've given you is to be able to see what is your HMDA application date, what is your RESPA application date, what are the findings here, and what's the data that I need to have on these transactions before I can request a withdrawn method or before I can request a denial on a transaction. So one of the things we want to look at, yes. Is there a question? Okay, so if you have a transaction in which your consumer, and I'm going to scroll down and we're going to start with withdrawal. So one of the things is if you have a request for withdrawal from a consumer, and the HMDA regulation indicates that a withdrawal has to be expressly requested by the consumer. So what we're asking you to provide is the withdrawn method. So did they send you an email Was it a written notice of some kind, or was it a verbal communication to you? I want to withdraw the loan. Then also, when did they ask for it? Was it yesterday? Was it today? When was it? If it is prior to 72 hours from the, if it's before initial disclosures are due, it's going to allow you to say it was an early withdrawal, okay? So if it's prior to disclosures, it's considered an early withdrawal, and so then you should know you don't have disclosures that have to go out. Then also what you're going to be providing to your team is what that recommended HMDA action is. And you might say, well, they withdrew. How can there be a recommended HMDA action other than withdrawn? So a lot of it depends on the stage of your file. So if there truly has been no credit decision, so if it hasn't been to an underwriter, either for a TBD pre-approval or true underwrite, then you're correct. It is just a withdrawn file. However, if it has been to an underwriter and a decision has been made, it could be application approved but not accepted, or if it was a TBD, it could be pre-approval request approved but not accepted. So these are simply recommendations that you'll be making to your compliance team. So you just need to select one, and you need to provide them some comments here in the comments box. So you're going to put a comment in here as to why. What was the reason for withdrawal? Maybe it was market competition. Maybe it was they lost their job. Whatever that is, you're going to document that reason for withdrawal, and then you're going to click the request withdrawal button. Okay? So one of the things, so that's what your responsibility is on a withdrawal transaction. So let's look at what's your responsibility on a denied transaction. So same concept, right? Same concept of we want to request a denial. Well, what's the reason? Maybe it was for the employment history. Maybe it was the credit history. The person's got a 480 credit score, let's just say, okay? You're going to, again, give us at least one denial reason, a comment, and then you can request the decline. So pretty basic, pretty basic. But then you also have a restart. So if you have a file that is a restart, you would enter the new loan number here and click the loan restart. Okay, fairly straightforward, right? As far as your responsibilities in a transaction. Can we go ahead and mute our lines? Okay, so I'm going to get out of this one and I'm going to go into a different loan because that was a really simple, easy process, right? Well, it's not always going to be that easy. And that's what I want you to see, is that there are times that it's not going to be just that simple. And so let me go ahead and show you. And we're going to use this one as our example. And when I hit my withdrawal button, it's going to tell me I am missing all kinds of information, right? And unfortunately, it doesn't allow me to click on it and go to that field. The data has to be requested, has to be entered within the loan itself. So the reason you're being stopped for all of this data is because this is an application. And when a loan has reached RESPA application, that's when the level of data that has to be entered for the loan to be reported increases dramatically. So a couple of these things can be solved fairly simply. The first one is any geocoding information can be populated simply by running Maven. So all you have to do is go to Tools, go to Compliance Review, and order your Mavent. That's all you got to do. Just run a preview. Mavent will bring in APR. Mavent is going to bring in your geocoding data. It's very simple to get that information into your environment. So those are very simple. Something else that you get that I get a lot of feedback on is people will say, it's saying that I need to complete my borrower race, ethnicity, or sex. And those fields are fairly simple as well. If you get stopped and it's telling you these fields are not populated, but you go to the 1003 and those fields are populated, it's fairly simple what you need to do. If you will just uncheck it and recheck it, you're going to find that the system does exactly what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to come up here and I'm also going to do that. And now we're going to go back to our adverse screen and I want to show you what you're going to be looking for. And do you see now that these three little check boxes here show that they're checked off? And that's all the system was looking for. So now it's not going to ask us for those anymore. So anytime you get asked that keeps asking you, I have race or ethnicity or sex, just deselect it and select it again. For some reason, typically due to the methodology in which the file was submitted, it didn't trigger that field is there. Even though the field's there, the system isn't acknowledging that the field is there. So those are all some pretty straightforward, just quick tips on how you solve those issues. Most of the time, this is an old test loan, so most of the time you're not going to experience these types of things. But right now, you can see this is a test loan, and I did this on purpose. I wanted you all to see the types of fields that you could come across when hitting that request for withdrawal or the request for decline. That's primarily when you're going to receive those hard stops for those actions. The other data on these screens is strictly for the use of your compliance team. As you'll see, I'm logged in right now as a loan officer. As a loan officer, I don't have access to a lot of this. It's a view only. It's there for informational purposes for you, and that's it. So I'm going to stop right there as our first area of review. Any questions on that component there? And I don't know, trying to see, since I'm sharing my screen, I got to see if I can figure out if there's a chat that I can look at. I can't tell. Oh, wait, here we go. There is a chat. Let me look. Okay, so any questions on decline, withdraw, file restart? Okay, I'm going to leave that chat open there, and we're going to transition to the next area for us to talk about. And I've talked about it a little bit already, and that is the HMDA fields. And you guys can see where I've already shown you a couple of tricks as it relates to HMDA fields. And a lot of that is going to be required as you go through the loan. Data gets updated. Can I have everyone mute their lines? I'm sorry, there's just a lot of background noise. I feel like I'm yelling. I apologize. So a couple of things here is you'll notice, like when we hit this button, there's some key fields that are really important when it comes to your HMDA data. And some of those are your AUS findings, and then also your credit score findings. And those are data fields that really drive a lot of functionality in your system. And this next part that I'm going to talk about is significant, not just for HMDA, but it's also really significant for ATR-QM. And I know, and so ATR-QM, if you are not familiar completely with that terminology, That's your ability to repay and qualified mortgage information. And this information has to be reported to the regulators every quarter, okay? And so this is something that your teams address, your corporate teams address every quarter. And we found that there has been a lot of consistency in errors of data not being completed as it relates to the ATR QM. And it's not that the data isn't in the loan, it's just not in the right place in the loan. And so some of what we're going to go through next is giving you some perspective as to how you complete that data so that you're not in this situation of needing to go back and update your loan after the fact. You're going to note, as of today, there are some additional hard stops in your system. Some of those are going to come at final approval, and that has to do with the ATR QM. So these findings, the ATR QM findings, the loan type, the ATR loan type, QM loan type, and then safe harbor, those three findings are required at final approval. And they're going to be required based on specific criteria, and I'm not going to go into the granular detail of that right now for you guys, but those findings are required. There are a few circumstances in which they're not required. But so let's talk a little bit about the AUS and how AUS impacts both HMDA and ATR. So in order for a loan to be ATR QM, you have to have indicated whether or not the transaction was underwritten, and if it was underwritten to an automated underwriting source. So I'm going to transition and go over here. I'm going to go out as being a loan originator, and I'm going to come in as me as a super admin just for today's demonstration purposes is all I'm going to do. And I'm going to come into my training folder here. All right, so all right, let's hop into a random loan just for review purposes. So one of the things that is a pretty common thing that we've seen in your files that creates a bit of chaos for the ATR QM screen is that when AUS findings are brought back into the loan, some of you may or may not know this, but there is an AUS tracking screen that is under your Tools tab. When you run DU or LP, you should come into this screen and click the Copy to Transmittal Summary button. If you do this, it's going to pull in the AUS type and the AUS recommendation into the loan. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring it in here to your transmittal and tell you what that AUS type was, if it was DU or if it was LP. If it was DU, obviously we're going to be looking for an approve eligible. If I can type today, I don't know if that's typed correctly. But when you do that, that data is populating through onto your HMDA information screen. So having that information on the transmittal is key. Otherwise, it's going to ask you for that data. So that's why putting that on the transmittal is significant and required. You are going to find, prior to final approval, that those fields on the transmittal must be populated moving forward. The circumstances in which they are not populated, obviously, if the loan is manually underwritten, you're not going to have an AUS recommendation, and instead it would say manual underwriting here. Obviously, also in a GUS situation, it would be other If you select other, it opens up this field and you can enter the word GUS, or the acronym GUS rather. So okay, great, this is here. But beyond that, what makes this part really important for the underwriters on the loan is that this has to match what's on your underwriting summary. And that's here. So if you have underwritten this loan by AUS findings, this button has to be selected. Otherwise, your ATR-QM findings are not going to populate. In addition, not only does this have to be selected, but in order for ATR-QM findings to populate, you have to have all of these buttons selected. What these are telling the system is that as part of your underwrite, you took into consideration each of these factors. It doesn't matter if there was child support on the file. If there's not, the whole point is you considered, is there? Should I consider it? If there's not, great, there's not, but I still took it into consideration. And so each of these has to be selected. So for ATR-QM to fire, these have to be selected regardless of whether it is manually underwritten or underwritten to AUS. So, and this has to coordinate with what's on the transmittal. So the transmittal can't say manual and show approve eligible, and the underwriting summary have this mark. If it's a manual underwrite, it has to be indicated here as manually underwritten, and it has to be indicated on the transmittal as manually underwritten with no AUS recommendation. The ATR-QM is not going to populate the correct finding until you have that information correct. Okay, and you can see simply by clicking the buttons, the system knows based on the data in your loan. That's the biggest thing about all of this, the HMDA and the ATR-QM, is that it's 100% data driven. It's all about the data in the right place in the file. Okay, so that's one component of how the data for HMDA also correlates to the data for ATR-QM, making sure that you have the right data in the right spot within the file. Additionally, another field that's significant for the for the HMDA purpose is making sure that you have your credit scores and that your credit scores have been pulled into the file. Now, obviously, you're typically going to pull this in through when you run credit and you're going to import your liabilities, having these fields here and coming up with your mid-FICO, that's going to automatically as well flow through into your loan and into your HMDA information screen for your compliance team. So making sure all of that information is accurate and correct. Okay, you can also see the fact that I switched this to a manual underwrite, it changed the findings here in HMDA. So all of these areas have to coordinate with each other. And we see a lot that it'll say it was a manual underwrite in one spot and the other spot will be blank. So we want to make sure we're getting that information in each of the areas of the file. So if you find, you go to request, an adverse, and there's a HMDA field that's not showing up. Okay, oh shoot, it's not going to do it for me. There's a HMDA field that it's saying is empty. The recommendation is go find the data in the loan that speaks to that information. Credit score isn't populated. Go make sure your credit score in the loan is populated. It says it needs AUS findings. Go make sure, again, your transmittal summary is populated. All of those kinds of things. Go back to the loan itself and make sure your data is correct in the loan. And that will typically solve your HMDA issue. All right, any questions on the HMDA completion as it relates to adverse? We have one more component of the ATR-QM to talk about, but before I transition to that, any questions? Someone did ask if there would be a job aid. Yes, I'll be providing a job aid for the adverse request form, not for all of the other components. But yes, I will have one for the adverse request form that will be going to Mark later after this call today, and then he can get that distributed out to everyone. All right, I'm going to keep going forward then with the ATR-QM. Was there a question? All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the ATR-QM. So there's a couple of other fields that I just want to go through with you all as it relates to ATR-QM and making sure you're getting that result in the file before that loan is final approved and moved to closing. Yes, Christy, I can get a job aid for underwriting on all of these components that I've gone through. So the next one is, if it is a VA transaction, there's some additional fields on the VA loan summary that have to coordinate. So if it's a VA transaction, you have to tell the system, was it underwritten by an AUS? So this can't say yes and the file be manually underwritten. If the loan was manually underwritten, it has to say no. If it says no, then these two have to be blank. If it says yes on a VA, then these have to be populated. If it was actually underwritten by AUS, so on a VA, these three fields are also essential for completion. On an FHA, these fields are essential for completion. But if it just says approve, accept, it's not going to give you an ATR-QM result. It has to have both the risk class and the eligibility assessment. Now, I've built in some business rules for you all to make that a little bit easier for you. And some of this is going to auto-populate for you just to make things a bit easier, okay? So we're trying to drive this as much as I can for you, but these are all elements that do need to be reviewed. All right, so the very last thing I want to go through with you on ATR-QM has to do with your exempt transactions. And there are transactions that are exempt from ATR-QM. Now, I've put some rules in, and these are new rules for you that are going to drive some of this functionality, but I can't drive all of it through the system. So the first thing as it relates to ATR-QM is investment properties. And an investment property could be ATR-QM, but they're exempt from reporting, so they don't have to be documented. So what you're going to see is if the occupancy on a loan is investment, this is going to automatically indicate for ATR that this is an exempt transaction. And it's going to tell you down here in the exemption eligibility section that it's exempt due to it's not for primary personal, family, or household purposes. And we've got that in here for you. Now, if you've got a loan right now, a current transaction in which the occupancy is already selected, it's not going to do this for you, which is why I'm showing you this. Because you can come in and you can check the box and tell it, this is not, the primary purpose is not personal. It's an investment property. Along the same lines, and I'm going to switch this back really quick. I'm going to move that back to a primary, and it should take that away, and it did. Along the same lines, you have another loan type that's automatically exempt. For those of you that do reverse transactions are also exempt. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change loan program here to a HECM. Maybe. And when I do that, on my EPM loan summary, you will note that it's going to change this to a reverse. And in the ATR QM, it's going to tell us it's exempt because it's a reverse. So the last type of loan that would be exempt, this one, unfortunately, I can't automate for you because there's not a consistent component within your site with which to automate it. But it is something that you need to be aware of because you can come in and document it as such. And that is a DPA or a housing finance agency loan. So if you have a subordinate lien that is a DPA or a housing finance, the system will allow you to come to ATR QM, go down, let's take out this reverse. On a DPA, you would select creditor type. I think this one's the DPA, yes. And you would select down payment assistance provider. And now it would be exempt from ATR QM. On a housing, so like mass housing, it would be a loan program and it would be housing finance agency program. Those are the few examples of exempt transactions that you at Equity do. The others here would not apply unless you're doing a construction loan or a HELOC, and I don't believe you guys do HELOCs. But those are the only ones that you all offer as products that would be exempt outside of reverse or investment properties. Okay, any questions on that component? I know that's a lot of information I gave you guys in a very brief 34 minutes. So I know it's a lot. We started with the adverse process. We talked about HMDA. We talked about ATR QM and the data integrity around each of those things. Any questions for me? I expect you're going to have some, even if it's not right this minute. So you will notice in your transactions as of today, on new files, the adverse request form is part of your standard input form set. All input form sets have been updated to account for it. In an existing transaction, if you will hit show in alpha, show all in your form section, that form will become visible to you. And it's available for the vast majority of personas that would be requesting an adverse disposition on a file. So loan officer, loan processor, underwriter, closer, anybody that could potentially need to adverse a transaction, that is going to be listed for you. business rules, you are going to find the vast majority of the business rules are going to apply to new loans. The other component is, well, most of the business rules are going to only apply once you reach a certain milestone, I guess I should say. That's kind of the big component there. So any questions for me? And Pam, I do see your question and I will respond to you on that one. It is one we're probably going to have to go to the compliance team with as it relates to points and fees. Actually, let me go ahead and address really quickly one thing on points and fees that I've seen repeatedly on loans recently. And I'm just going to quickly go through this. As it relates to your itemization, all fees on the itemization must have a paid to indicated. You all, we are seeing in many cases that your loans are failing for points and fees simply because in the 1300 section, no one bothered to mark this as paid to other or your fees as paid to other. If a fee is not marked as paid to other, the system will assume it's being paid to you, the lender, and you're going to fail points and fees. That is a common error we have seen. It's not just in one branch, it's across the company. But that component does make a huge difference for you guys as it relates to points and fees. Making sure all of every fee on the itemization has a points and fees indicator or has a paid to indicator. And then also making sure your APRs are documented correctly. MI is APR, you know, anything paid to the lender should be marked as paid to the lender. Any origination points, any discount, always paid to lender, those are APR fees. So each of those components makes a really big difference when calculating your points and fees. Any questions on that component?
We've got a very shy bunch today.
You know what? I expect if you guys have questions, send tickets into your help desk, and I know Mark will have this forwarded to me so that we make sure we get those addressed for you.
Okay.
All right. Other than that, I think we're done for today, Mark. I will get you those desk guide resources so that they have something to refer back to. And if there's any other questions, though, just feel free to reach out.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you.